Welcome to Elizabeth's Stories. Today we follow Margaret Thompson, a 64-year-old widow betrayed by her greedy children who uncovers their plot, reclaims her power, and finds freedom in a new life. Subscribe and hit the bell for weekly tales of truth and empowerment. Share your thoughts below. Let's start the story. The scent of cinnamon and baked apples hung heavy in my kitchen, a warm cloud that felt like a memory of better days. I slid the apple pie, David's favorite, out of the oven, its golden crust glistening under the soft glow of the pendant light. At 64, I'd perfected this recipe over decades, each fold of dough a quiet ritual of love for my son, the boy who used to grin ear to ear at the first bite. The pie was for tomorrow, when David and his wife Claire would visit. I hummed an old tune, one my late husband Robert used to whistle in this very kitchen, as flour dusted my apron like a faint snow. Then my phone chimed, a sharp, insistent sound that sliced through the melody. I wiped my hands on a dish towel, expecting a text from David, confirming their arrival time. Instead, it was a voice message, the kind he rarely sent. My thumb hovered over the play button, a strange weight settling in my chest, like the air before a storm. I pressed it. David's voice filled the room low and venomous, not meant for my ears. "I can't stand this useless old hag anymore, Claire. She's dragging this out too long. Soon she'll be taking her final nap, and we'll be sipping champagne in Paris, spending her money." The pie tin slipped from my hands, clattering onto the counter. The world tilted, the kitchen's warmth turning cold, as if the very walls had recoiled from his words. My blood felt like ice in my veins, each heartbeat a hammer against my ribs. I replayed the message, hoping I had misheard. But there it was again, useless old hag final nap, Paris. The words were a blade cutting through 30 years of love, sacrifice, and trust. My son, my David, plotting my death like it was a business deal. I stood frozen, staring at the pie, its perfection now a mockery. The message wasn't meant for me. It was for Claire, his wife, sent by mistake. A cruel twist of fate, or perhaps something more. Robert used to say the universe had a way of unveiling truths when you least expected them. I'd laughed at his cryptic musings then, but now standing in the wreckage of my trust, I wondered if he'd known something I hadn't. My hands didn't shake as I picked up the phone again. Grief had forged a certain steel in me since Robert's death 3 years ago. Widowhood teaches you to face betrayal, not from strangers, but from those you love most. I scrolled to a number I hadn't called in years, one I'd memorized, but hoped never to use. James Morrison. Robert's old friend and our estate attorney answered on the second ring. "Margaret, is everything all right?" His voice was warm but edged with concern, as if he'd been expecting this call. "Jim," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "Remember the conversation we had after Robert's diagnosis about the special provisions he wanted?" A pause, heavy with understanding. "Are you saying it's time?" "It's time. Put the plan into action. I'll make the calls. Everything will be in motion by morning." I hung up, the silence of the kitchen pressing against me like a living thing. The pie sat cooling, its aroma now sour in my nose. Tomorrow, David would walk through my door expecting his doting, gullible mother to serve him dessert and maybe ask for another small loan for his mortgage. He'd smile, hug me, play the part of the devoted son. But I wasn't that woman anymore. Not after what I'd heard. I walked to the kitchen window, gazing out at the garden where Robert's roses still bloomed their crimson petals, defiant against the autumn chill. "Well, honey," I whispered to his memory, "looks like you were right about them." The roses seemed to nod in the breeze as if Robert's spirit lingered there watching. He'd always been 3 steps ahead, a man who saw octos where others saw light. The plan. Robert had devised it during his final months when cancer had hollowed his body, but not his mind. We'd sat in his hospital room, his hand frail but firm in mine. Maggie, he'd said, his voice a rasp. People change when money's involved, even family. Promise me you'll protect yourself. I'd promised, though I'd never imagined I'd need to protect myself from my own children. David, with his boyish grin and quick laugh, Sarah, my sharp-witted daughter, who'd once called me her hero. How had it come to this? I replayed David's message again, searching for a crack in its meaning, but it was ironclad. He and Claire were tired of pretending to care, already planning their Parisian escape once I was gone. The word gone echoed in my mind, carrying a weight beyond death. It wasn't just my life they wanted to end. It was my presence, my claim to what Robert and I had built. The house, the savings, the life insurance. I'd been blind, wrapped in grief, but the signs had been there. David's missed calls, canceled visits, his sudden curiosity about my finances. Claire's too sweet smiles. Her eyes lingering on my grandmother's china cabinet like she was pricing it for auction. I moved to the living room, sinking into Robert's old recliner, its leather worn from years of his touch. The house was too quiet, the kind of quiet that amplifies doubt. Had I missed something? Was this my fault? Had I raised a son who saw me as an obstacle rather than a mother? The questions swirled, but beneath them a spark of resolve ignited. I wasn't the fragile widow they thought I was. Robert had made sure of that. I pulled out the folder labeled Important Documents from my desk drawer. Inside were the papers. David and Claire thought they understood my will. Robert's life insurance policy, property, deeds, investment accounts. But there was more, much more that they didn't know. Robert had been meticulous paranoid even during his final days. People get strange around death and money. He'd warned me during one of his chemo treatments, his eyes sharp despite the pain. Even family, especially family. He'd set up protections, trust funds, legal mechanisms, fail-safes that would activate if anyone tried to take advantage of me. At the time, I'd thought he was overreacting, his mind clouded by illness. Now I saw his prescience. The folder felt heavier than it should, as if Robert's foresight had imbued it with a strange power. I opened it, running my fingers over the pages, each one a testament to his love, his distrust, his need to shield me. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. A text from Claire. Looking forward to tomorrow. Margaret. David can't wait for your famous pie. I stared at the words, their cheerfulness a grotesque mask. My lips curved into a smile, the first since hearing David's voice. Oh, sweetheart, I thought you have no idea what's coming. I stood moving back to the kitchen where the pie sat, like a relic of a life I no longer recognized. The roses outside caught my eye again, their petals almost glowing in the moonlight. For a moment, I swore I saw a shadow flicker among them, a silhouette too familiar to dismiss. Robert. I shook my head, chastising myself for such thoughts, but the unease lingered, a whisper that this betrayal was only the beginning of something darker. I poured a glass of wine, the deep red catching the light like the roses. As I sipped, I replayed the last 6 months in my mind, searching for the moment things had shifted. It started after Robert's funeral when David pulled me aside at the reception, his arm around my shoulders. Mom, this house is too big for one person. Have you thought about downsizing? His tone had been gentle, concerned, but now I saw the calculation behind it. Claire's comments about the antique furniture, the hardwood floors, the charming fixtures that could be updated beautifully. The brochures for senior living communities, Sunset Manor, Golden Years Estates, handed to me with saccharine smiles. They'd been subtle but persistent. David's questions about property values, inheritance taxes, Claire's enthusiasm for activities like watercolor painting and chair yoga as if I were already half buried. And Sarah, my daughter, hadn't been innocent either. Her calls, once warm, had grown stilted, her concern tinged with an agenda. "We're just worried about you, Mom," she'd said last month, her voice a perfect imitation of care. Managing everything alone must be hard. I set the wine glass down my reflection, staring back from the dark window. The woman I saw wasn't the useless old hag David described. She was Margaret Thompson, who'd balanced the family finances for 37 years while Robert built his dental practice, who'd survived 3 years of widowhood planting roses and baking pies to keep the ghosts at bay, who'd promised her dying husband she'd protect herself no matter the cost. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight each second, a reminder that tomorrow would change everything. I picked up the phone again, listening to David's message one last time. His voice wasn't just irritated, it was cold, deliberate, like a man who'd already written my obituary. I deleted it, the act final, like locking a door. I walked to the garden, the night air sharp against my skin. The roses seemed to whisper, their petals trembling in the breeze. I knelt beside them, touching the soil where Robert had worked his hands steady even as his body failed. "You knew, didn't you?" I murmured. "You saw this coming." A sudden gust stirred the roses, and for a heartbeat, I felt a presence, warm, familiar like Robert's hand on my shoulder. I stood, brushing off the chill. Tomorrow, David and Claire would arrive, expecting the same naive mother they'd underestimated. But they'd find someone else entirely. Someone who'd been forged in grief, armed with Robert's plan, and ready to unravel their lies. As I returned to the house, the folder of documents caught my eye again. I opened it, pulling out a single sheet I hadn't noticed before, a note in Robert's handwriting tucked between the legal pages. "Maggie, if you're reading this, trust your instincts. The truth is always darker than it seems. Check the attic. R. The attic." My heart quickened. Robert had spent hours up there in his final months sorting through old boxes claiming he was organizing. I'd thought it was his way of coping, but now I wondered, what had he hidden? What truth was darker than my son's betrayal? I climbed the stairs, the house creaking like it was holding its breath. The attic door was heavy, its hinges groaning as I pushed it open. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight, revealing boxes, old furniture, and a locked trunk in the corner, a trunk I didn't recognize. My fingers trembled as I traced the lock, Robert's note burning in my mind. Whatever was inside it was the next piece of the puzzle, the next step in the plan. And as I stood in the attic's shadows, I knew one thing for certain: David's voice message wasn't just a mistake. It was the spark that would ignite a reckoning. The attic's chill clung to me as I descended the stairs. Robert's cryptic note burning in my pocket. Check the attic. The truth is always darker than it seems. His words echoed like a riddle, a thread pulling me towards something I wasn't ready to face. The locked trunk I'd found old, ornate, and heavy with secrets loomed in my mind, but I couldn't bring myself to open it yet. Not tonight. Not after David's voice had shattered my world with his venomous message. I needed to understand how I'd missed the signs, how my own children had woven a web of deceit around me. I settled back into Robert's recliner, the leather creaking under my weight, and closed my eyes. The house was silent, but it wasn't empty. It never had been. Since Robert's death, I'd felt him in the small things, the way the roses in the garden bloomed out of season, the faint hum of his favorite jazz record playing when no one was near the old turntable. Grief, I'd told myself. Just grief. But now, with David's betrayal ringing in my ears and Robert's note in my hand, I wondered if there was more to it. Had he left me more than a plan? Had he left me a way to see? I let my mind drift back, piecing together the moments that should have warned me. The signs had been there subtle as shadows, but I'd been too wrapped in widowhood to notice. It started 6 months ago at Robert's funeral. The church was packed with faces I barely recognized, their condolences a blur of platitudes. David had pulled me aside during the reception, his arm around my shoulders, his cologne sharp and unfamiliar. Mom. He'd said, his voice soft but deliberate. This house is too big for you now. Have you thought about downsizing, something cozier, easier to manage? I'd smiled, touched by his concern. Sweet David worried about his aging mother rattling around in a 4-bedroom colonial. I'd brushed it off, blaming his suggestion on the rawness of loss. But looking back, I saw the flicker in his eyes. Not concern, but calculation. He hadn't been looking at me. He'd been looking at the house, the hardwood floors, the antique chandelier Robert and I had restored. He'd been appraising. Claire had been worse. Her sweetness a veneer so thin it cracked under scrutiny. She'd glide through my home during their visits, her fingers trailing over the mahogany dining table, her comments laced with greed. These floors are gorgeous, Margaret. Original, aren't they? You could get a fortune for this place. She'd laugh as if it were a casual remark, but her eyes lingered too long on my grandmother's china cabinet. The silver candlesticks, the oil painting Robert had bought on our 20th anniversary. I'd thought she was admiring our life together. Now I saw she was pricing it. The visits felt like inspections, each one more invasive than the last. David would ask about property values, casually dropping questions about inheritance taxes or the cost of maintaining a house this size. Claire would nod along her smile, a practiced mask, and suggest updates that would increase the value. New fixtures, modernized bathrooms, a kitchen remodel. As if I'd sell the home where Robert and I had raised our children, where his roses still bloomed. Then came the brochures. Glossy, expensive pamphlets for senior living communities with names like Sunset Manor and Golden Years Estates. Claire had spread them across my coffee table one afternoon, her enthusiasm almost manic. Look at these activities, Margaret watercolor painting chair, yoga book clubs. You'd make so many friends. Her voice was bright, but her eyes were cold, like a jeweler assessing a flawed gem. David had chimed in, his tone earnest. It's about your quality of life, Mom. You don't want to be burdened by this big house. Burdened. The word had stung, but I'd swallowed it, convincing myself they were worried about me. I'd been blind, wrapping their words in the soft gauze of grief. But now, with David's voice and message echoing in my mind, useless old hag final nap, Paris. I saw the truth. They weren't worried about my burden. They were worried about my wealth, about how long they'd have to wait to claim it. Sarah, my daughter, had been subtler, but no less complicit. Her calls had grown infrequent, her visits rare. When she did come, her questions were sharp, probing. How are you managing the finances? Mom-Dad left you enough, right? She'd ask with a smile, as if it were idle curiosity. But I'd catch her glancing at the safe in my study, the one where I kept the important documents. Once she'd suggested I meet with a financial advisor to make sure your nest egg is secure. Secure for whom, I wondered now. For me or for her? The memory that cut deepest was 3 weeks ago when David and Claire had come for dinner. The air had felt heavy that night, the kind of heaviness that settles before a storm. Claire had brought a bottle of wine, too expensive, too showy, and David had been overly attentive, refilling my glass before it was empty. Mom, he'd said, leaning forward, his elbows on the table, you don't want to outlive your money. Have you thought about consolidating your accounts? My friend's a financial advisor. He could help. I'd laughed it off, chalking it up to his real estate job, his obsession with numbers. But now, replaying that night, I saw the way Claire's eyes had darted to David, a silent signal. I saw the way he'd watched me sip the wine, his gaze lingering too long, as if waiting for something. A chill ran through me. Had there been something in that wine? A subtle poison, or just my imagination running wild? The thought was absurd. But Robert's note, "The truth is always darker than it seems," made it feel less so. I stood pacing the living room, the folder of documents still open on the desk. The house seemed to hum with secrets, its walls whispering memories I'd ignored. Robert had warned me, hadn't he? During one of his chemo treatments, his voice weak but urgent, he'd gripped my hand. Maggie. People get strange around death and money, even family. Especially family. I'd thought he was delirious, his paranoia a side effect of the drugs. But he'd insisted on the planned trust funds, legal fail-safes, a contingency for betrayal. Promise me you'll use it if you need to. He'd said, his eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that felt otherworldly. I'd promised, but I hadn't understood. Not until now. The folder on the desk held more than papers. It held Robert's foresight, his love, his warning. I flipped through it, my fingers brushing over the will, the property deeds, the investment accounts. But it was the note from the attic that haunted me. Why the attic? What had Robert hidden there, and why had he waited until now to guide me to it? I moved to the kitchen, needing to ground myself. The pie sat on the counter, its crust still perfect, but it felt like a lie now. I touched it, the warmth gone, and remembered another moment, a dinner with Sarah just 2 months ago. She'd brought her husband Tom and their children, my grandchildren, who'd played in the garden while we talked. Sarah had been quieter than usual, her eyes darting to the roses, then back to me. Mom, you're so strong living here alone, but don't you ever get lonely. You could move closer to us, to a place with support. Support. Another word that hid a knife. I'd smiled, distracted by the kids' laughter, but now I saw the pattern. Sarah's concern, like David's, was a script rehearsed and polished. She'd mentioned a senior community near their house, one with luxury amenities and round-the-clock care. Tom had nodded, adding, "It's about independence, Margaret. You'd still be in control." Control. The irony was bitter now. They'd wanted control not of my life, but of my legacy. I poured another glass of wine, the liquid catching the light like blood. The roses outside seemed to glow in the darkness, their petals unnaturally vibrant. I stepped onto the porch, the night air sharp and alive. The garden felt different tonight, as if it held its breath. I knelt beside the roses, their scent overwhelming, and for a moment I swore I heard Robert's voice, a low murmur carried on the wind. "Look closer, Maggie." I froze, my heart pounding. "Robert," I whispered, feeling foolish but unable to stop. The roses swayed, though the air was still. A petal fell landing at my feet, and I saw it, a small, carved stone, half buried in the soil, etched with a symbol I didn't recognize, a circle with a cross inside, like a compass. My fingers trembled as I dug it out, the dirt cool and damp. It was no ordinary stone. It was heavy, warm, and pulsed faintly as if alive. I stumbled back inside, clutching the stone, my mind racing. Robert had loved puzzles, riddles, secrets. He'd spent hours in the garden, even when he was too weak to stand, claiming he was tending the roses. Had he hidden this stone for me to find? Was it connected to the trunk in the attic? The note? The plan? I returned to the attic, the stone in one hand, Robert's note in the other. The trunk loomed in the corner, its lock gleaming under my flashlight. The symbol on the stone matched a faint engraving on the lock, a perfect fit. My breath caught. This wasn't just a trunk. It was a message, a key to something Robert had left behind. I hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within me. Whatever was inside it would change everything. I sat back, the stone heavy in my palm, and let the memories flood back again. The final straw had been David's suggestion 3 weeks ago that I meet his financial advisor friend. Just to make sure your nest egg is properly managed. Mom, he'd said, his smile too wide. You don't want to outlive your money. Outlive my money. As if I were a fool who couldn't balance a checkbook. I'd managed our finances for 37 years while Robert focused on his dental practice. I'd known every penny, every investment, every bill. But David and Claire hadn't seen that. They'd seen a vulnerable widow, a woman they could nudge toward a retirement home, her assets neatly packaged for their future. Sarah had echoed the sentiment, her approach softer, but no less insidious. During a phone call last month, she'd said, "Mom, you're so independent." But what if something happens? A fall, a medical emergency. You should think about your future. Her voice had been warm, but I remembered the pause before she spoke, the way she'd hesitated when I asked about her own finances. "We're fine," she'd said too quickly. Now I wondered what she was hiding. Debt, desperation, a plan. The stone pulsed again, a faint warmth spreading through my fingers. I set it down, unnerved. The house creaked as if responding to my thoughts. I looked at the folder again, flipping to the back where I found another surprise, a photograph tucked between the pages. It was of Robert and me, taken in the garden years ago, our smiles bright against the roses. But there was something odd about it. In the background, near the rose bushes, was a faint figure, a shadow that shouldn't have been there. It was too tall, too distinct to be a trick of the light. My pulse quickened. Robert had always believed in signs and forces beyond what we could see. "The world speaks if you listen, Maggie," he'd say, his eyes twinkling. I'd laughed, called him fanciful. But now with the stone, the note, the shadow in the photo, I wasn't so sure. Was Robert still speaking to me, guiding me through this betrayal? I stood the attic's shadows, closing in. The trunk waited, its lock glinting like an eye. I didn't open it, not yet. I needed time to process, to prepare for what might be inside. But one thing was clear. David and Sarah's betrayal wasn't just about greed. There was something darker at play, something Robert had anticipated. And tomorrow, when David and Claire arrived, I'd be ready, not just with the plan, but with the strength I'd forgotten I had. I returned to the living room, the stone still in my hand, its warmth a quiet reassurance. The roses outside glowed brighter now, their light spilling through the window. I felt Robert's presence again, stronger this time, like a hand on my shoulder. "I'm listening," I whispered. And in the silence I swore I heard him answer, "Good. Now fight." The morning sun filtered through the kitchen curtains, casting golden slants across the apple pie that sat untouched on the counter. Its perfection mocked me, a relic of a love I'd poured into my son David, now tainted by his venomous words, "Useless old hag, final nap, Paris." The memory of his voice message burned like a wound, but the carved stone from the garden, now resting in my pocket, pulsed with a faint warmth, grounding me. Robert's note. "Check the attic." The truth is always darker than it seems, had led me to a locked trunk I hadn't yet dared to open, but its presence loomed in my mind, a silent promise of secrets yet to be unveiled. I stood at the sink, washing dishes to steady my nerves, when the doorbell rang at precisely 900 a.m. My heart quickened, not with fear, but with resolve. David and Claire were here, expecting the same naive mother they'd underestimated. They'd find someone else entirely, a woman forged in grief, armed with Robert's plan, and guided by something I couldn't yet name. I opened the door, and there they stood on the porch, their smiles as polished as funeral parlor flowers. David's hug was rehearsed, his arms loose around me. "Mom, you look wonderful," he said, his voice warm but hollow. Claire stepped forward, clutching a bouquet of daisies. Daisies I had been allergic to for 20 years. "These are for you, Margaret," she chirped, her eyes flicking past me into the house. "David said you love them." "Thank you," I said, my voice calm, my smile a mirror of theirs. "Come in. I've got coffee ready." Some battles weren't worth fighting yet. I led them to the living room where the air felt thick, as if the house itself were holding its breath. The roses outside the window glowed unnaturally bright, their crimson petals almost pulsing in the morning light. I caught David glancing at them, his brow furrowing for a split second before his smile returned. They settled onto the sofa, their eyes wandering David's to the family photos on the mantel, Claire's, to my grandmother's china cabinet. It wasn't admiration, it was appraisal, as if they were already dividing my life into lots for auction. I poured coffee, my hands steady, despite the storm inside me. The stone in my pocket warmed again, a subtle thrum that felt like Robert's presence urging me forward. "So, Mom." David began after we'd exhausted small talk about the weather. "Claire and I have been thinking about your situation here." His tone was casual, but his fingers tapped the armrest, betraying his nerves. "My situation?" I asked. Sipping my coffee, my eyes locked on his. "You know, being alone, managing this big house, all the responsibilities." He exchanged a glance with Claire, who nodded, her smile tightening. "What responsibilities, David?" I kept my voice light, but the stone pulsed hotter, as if feeding off my rising anger. He faltered, his confidence slipping. "The yard work, maintenance, grocery shopping, your medications." "I don't take any medications except vitamins." I interrupted, setting my cup down with a deliberate clink. "I'm 64, not 94. Claire leaned forward, her face a mask of practiced sympathy. "Of course you're still young and capable, Margaret. But wouldn't it be nice to have help? To live somewhere where you don't have to worry about anything?" She reached into her purse, pulling out a glossy brochure, shinier than the ones they'd brought before. "Look at this one, Oak Brook Estates. It's got a golf course, 3 restaurants, even transportation to appointments." I took the brochure, its weight heavy in my hands. The monthly fees started at $8,000. "This looks expensive," I said, raising an eyebrow. "That's the beauty of it," Claire said, her eyes lighting up like a predator scenting prey. "You'd sell this house, and the proceeds would cover years of worry-free living." There it was, their endgame laid bare. Sell the house, liquidate my assets, make their inheritance accessible sooner. I set the brochure down, my gaze shifting to the roses outside. They seemed to sway, though the air was still, and for a moment I swore I saw a shadow flicker among them, tall, indistinct, but unmistakably familiar. "Robert." My pulse quickened, but I forced myself to focus. "And what happens to the money when I die?" I asked, my voice calm but cutting. Another glance between them, quick and nervous. "Well," David said carefully, "whatever's left would go to your beneficiaries as outlined in your will." "I see." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "And you've read my will, not read it exactly," David said, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "But we know the basics. Sarah and I inherit everything equally right. That's what you and Dad always told us." The stone in my pocket pulsed again, hotter now, as if urging me to act. I stood walking to my desk and pulled out a thick manila envelope. Actually, that's changed. The room seemed to drop 10 degrees, the air crackling with tension. Changed. Claire's voice cracked her fingers, gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles whitened. I mean, I've updated my will several times since your father died. I opened the envelope, pulling out a stack of legal documents. Would you like to review them? David stood abruptly, his face flushed. Mom, you should have discussed major financial decisions with us. We could have helped you understand the implications. Oh, I understand the implications perfectly. I said, my voice steady, my eyes locked on his. Drastic changes, as Claire might put it, are sometimes necessary. Claire's smile faltered. Margaret, surely you don't need to make anything drastic. Your original will was perfectly reasonable. Drastic. I raised an eyebrow, savoring the word. Interesting choice. I turned to the window where the roses glowed brighter, their petals almost shimmering. The shadow flickered again, more distinct now, a silhouette that seemed to nod in approval. I felt a surge of strength, as if Robert's spirit were standing beside me, guiding my words. Mom, you're clearly upset about something, David said, his voice tight. Making permanent legal changes when you're emotional isn't wise. Emotional, I almost laughed, turning back to face them. David, I haven't felt this clear-headed in years. My phone rang right on cue. James Morrison's name flashed on the screen. I answered, making sure my voice carried across the room. Margaret Thompson speaking. Mrs. Thompson. This is James Morrison. He said, his tone professional but warm. I'm calling to confirm that all the documents we discussed have been filed and executed as of this morning. Everything is now legally binding. Thank you, Jim, I said, my eyes never leaving David's. I'm so glad we were able to implement my late husband's protection plan. I hung up, and the silence stretched like a taut wire. David's face paled, his hands clenching into fists. Protection plan. What kind of protection plan? I smiled, settling back into my chair, the stone in my pocket now a steady pulse like a heartbeat, the kind that activates when someone tries to take advantage of a vulnerable widow. I reached for my phone again, my fingers steady as I opened the voice message. David's eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing his face. Mom, what are you? Before he could finish, I pressed play. His voice filled the room, cold and venomous. I can't stand this useless old hag anymore, Claire. She's dragging this out too long. Soon she'll be taking her final nap, and we'll be sipping champagne in Paris, spending her money. Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but I suspected she'd heard those words before. David's face drained of color, his eyes darting to the door as if he could escape his own voice. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of my grandfather clock in the hallway. The roses outside seemed to pulse brighter, their light spilling into the room, casting strange shadows that danced across David's face. Mom, I can explain. David started, his voice hoarse. Can you? I kept my tone pleasant, conversational, but the stone burned in my pocket as if fueling my resolve. I'm very interested to hear how you explain discussing my death as an inconvenience that's taking too long. That's not what I meant, he stammered, running a hand through his hair. I was frustrated talking to Claire about worrying about you living alone. It came out wrong. Claire found her voice, her eyes wide with feigned shock. It was taken completely out of context, Margaret. David's been so stressed about your well-being. My well-being. I repeated my voice, slow and deliberate. Tell me, Claire, When exactly did you book the trip to Paris? The question hung in the air like smoke. David's eyes darted to Claire, who suddenly found her manicure fascinating. We haven't booked anything, David said finally, his voice thin. I pulled out my phone, showing them a screenshot from Claire's Instagram posted 3 days ago. Can't wait for our romantic Paris getaway. Finally, booked the hotel we've been dreaming about. Claire's face cycled through shades of red, then white. That's that's for our anniversary next year, she stammered. Your anniversary is in March, I said, my voice sharp. This post talks about a September trip, next month, in fact. David sat down heavily, his hands in his hair. Okay, yes, we booked a trip, but it's not what you think. What I think, I interrupted, standing now, my voice rising like a tide, is that you've been planning to celebrate my death with a vacation. What I think is that you've been pushing me toward expensive senior living to drain my assets faster. What I think is that I raised a son who sees his mother as an obstacle to his inheritance. That's not fair. David snapped, his voice cracking with desperation. Do you know what it's like watching you live alone, knowing something could happen? The stress we've been under, the stress you've been under. I stepped closer, feeling the stone's heat spread through me like a fire, kindling in my veins, the stress of wondering when I'll die so you can spend my money. Claire started crying, her tears either real or a performance I couldn't tell with her. Margaret, please. We love you. We're worried about you. Maybe we've handled it badly, but our hearts are in the right place. Your hearts are in my bank account, I said, my voice cold as steel. The roses outside flared brighter, their light casting an eerie glow across the room, and for a moment I swore I saw that shadow again, taller, clearer, standing just beyond the window. David and Claire didn't notice their eyes locked on me, but the air felt charged, as if the house itself were watching. David stood, his face flushed. Fine. You want honesty, yes. We're concerned about your finances. Yes, we've made plans based on what we thought our inheritance would be. But that doesn't mean we don't love you. Mom, be reasonable. We're family. Dad would have wanted us to look out for you. My father did want you to look out for me, I said, my voice low, dangerous. That's why he made sure I'd be protected from you. David's face twisted. Protected from us. We're your children. And yet here you are, plotting my demise over voice messages you thought I'd never hear. I pulled the legal documents from the envelope, spreading them across the coffee table. Would you like to read the new terms, or shall I summarize? David grabbed the papers, his hands shaking as he scanned them. His face went from red to pale to gray, as if the life were draining out of him. This can't be legal, he whispered. Oh, it's perfectly legal, I said, my smile sharp. Your father made sure of that. Claire was reading over his shoulder now, her tears forgotten. What does it say? She asked, her voice hollow. David's voice was barely audible. It says, we get nothing. 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 I confirmed, my tone, cheerful, almost cruel. Every asset, every account, every penny. It all goes to charity if either of my children attempts to manipulate, coerce, or take advantage of me in any way. The silence was deafening, broken only by the rose's eerie glow and the faint hum of the house, as if it were alive with Robert's will. David looked up, his eyes blazing. You can't do this. We have rights. What rights are those exactly? I asked, leaning forward. You deserve exactly what you've earned, and based on today's conversation, that appears to be nothing. Claire stood abruptly, her purse clutched to her chest. This is insane. We're leaving. Good idea, I said, standing to match her. And Claire, you might want to cancel that Paris trip. As they gathered their things, David turned back, his face a mask of desperation. Mom, please, we can fix this. We can be better. I looked at him, searching for the boy who'd once brought me dandelion bouquets, who'd cried at his father's funeral. But all I saw was greed cloaked in remorse. Ask me again in a year, I said, my voice soft but unyielding. If you can prove you love me without expecting anything in return. They left without another word, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the house. I stood in the silence, the stone in my pocket now a steady pulse like a heartbeat synchronized with my own. The roses outside dimmed their glow, fading to a natural red, but the shadow lingered, watching me through the window. I moved to the desk, opening the folder again. Tucked inside was another note from Robert, one I hadn't noticed before. Maggie, when they show their true colors, don't hesitate. The trunk holds the key. R. My breath caught. The trunk in the attic with its lock matching the stone's symbol. Whatever was inside it was the next step in Robert's plan. A plan that felt less like legal maneuvering and more like a spell woven to protect me from the darkness I'd only begun to see. I climbed the attic stairs, the stone in my hand glowing faintly now, its warmth spreading through me. The trunk waited, its lock gleaming in the dim light. I hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within me, but the shadow from the garden seemed to follow its presence, a quiet urging. I slid the stone into the lock, and with a soft click, the trunk opened, revealing a leather-bound journal and a small, ornate box. My hands trembled as I lifted the journal, its pages filled with Robert's handwriting. The first line read, Maggie, if you've found this, you're ready to see the truth. They're not just greedy, they're dangerous. My heart pounded as I opened the box, revealing a silver amulet etched with the same symbol as the stone. It hummed with a strange energy, and as I touched it, the room seemed to shift, the air alive with whispers. Whatever Robert had left me, it was more than a plan. It was a weapon, a shield, a secret that would change everything. And as I stood in the attic, the journal and amulet in my hands, I knew one thing for certain. David and Claire's betrayal was only the beginning. The attic's shadows clung to me as I descended the stairs, Robert's leather-bound journal and the silver amulet heavy in my hands. The journal's first line, Maggie, if you've found this, you're ready to see the truth. They're not just greedy, they're dangerous. Burned in my mind, each word a spark igniting my resolve. The amulet, etched with the same compass-like symbol as the stone from the garden, hummed faintly, its warmth seeping into my skin like a quiet promise. I hadn't read further in the journal, not yet. The confrontation with David and Claire had left me raw, and the weight of their betrayal, coupled with the eerie glow of the roses and the shadow that seemed to follow me, was enough for one day. But the amulet's pulse, synchronized with my own heartbeat, urged me to stay vigilant. Something darker was coming. I settled into Robert's recliner, the leather creaking like a whisper of his presence. The house was silent, but not empty. The roses outside no longer glowed. Their petals dimmed to a natural crimson, but the air felt charged, as if the walls themselves were listening. The stone in my pocket and the amulet on the coffee table seemed to hum in unison, a subtle vibration that made the room feel alive. I closed my eyes, trying to process the morning's events, David's pale face as his own voice condemned him, Claire's crocodile tears, the legal documents that had stripped them of their inheritance. But it wasn't over. Sarah, my daughter, remained a question mark, a shadow of doubt in my heart. The phone rang, shattering the silence. Sarah's name flashed on the screen, and my stomach tightened. I'd been expecting this call, dreading it. David had likely told her about the confrontation, about the will, about the protection plan. I let it ring twice more, steadying myself before answering. Hello, Sarah. Hi, Mom. Her voice was soft-laced with the artificial concern I'd come to recognize. How are you holding up? The amulet pulsed its warmth, spreading through my fingers as I held it. I'm fine, honey. Actually, David was here this morning. He didn't mention that when you talked yesterday. A pause too long to be innocent. Oh, she said, her tone shifting, surprised but guarded. No, he didn't. What? What happened? Interesting, I said, my voice calm but sharp. Why don't you tell me what you think happened? Another pause, the kind that betrays a mind scrambling for the right words. David called me, she admitted finally. He's furious. He said you've cut him and Claire out of your will completely. Mom, what's going on? The amulet grew warmer, as if urging me to press harder. I stood pacing the living room, the journal on the coffee table catching my eye. Did he tell you about the voice message he accidentally sent me? Silence. Then carefully. What voice message? I pressed play, holding the phone close so she could hear every word. David's voice filled the air again, cold and venomous. I can't stand this useless old hag anymore, Claire. She's dragging this out too long. Soon she'll be taking her final nap, and we'll be sipping champagne in Paris, spending her money. The amulet pulsed hotter, and outside the roses seemed to stir their petals, catching the fading light in a way that felt unnatural. When the message ended, Sarah was quiet for a long moment. I could almost hear her calculating, weighing her response. Mom, I had no idea David felt that way about you, she said finally, her voice trembling with what sounded like shock. But I knew her too well. Sarah, the daughter, who'd always been the most dangerous kind of smart, as Robert used to say. Didn't you? I asked, my tone deceptively soft. Because David mentioned you two had discussed my living situation quite thoroughly. Another pause, longer this time. The amulet's hum grew stronger, and I swore I saw the shadow from the garden flicker outside the window. Its form more distinct now, tall, lean, unmistakably Robert. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. Sarah, can I ask you something? Have you and David been talking about my living situation? Silence. Then a careful response. We're just worried about you, Mom. Being alone in that big house, managing everything by yourself, it's a lot. The same script David had used almost word for word. I tightened my grip on the amulet, its warmth now a steady burn. And I suppose you both have suggestions for what I should do. Well, Sarah said, her voice growing smaller. There are some really nice communities where you could have help when you need it, but still maintain your independence. Independence. I repeated the word bitter on my tongue. You keep using that word, but what you mean is the opposite. Mom. That's not, she started, but I cut her off. When David suggested I move to assisted living, what did you tell him? I asked, my voice sharp, now the amulet's heat fueling my resolve. A long pause. I said, I thought it might be a good idea for your safety and social life, she admitted, her words careful, rehearsed. And when he talked about managing my finances, I pressed, stepping toward the window where the roses seemed to pulse faintly again. I said, maybe we should encourage you to be more conservative with your investments, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Conservative meaning what? I asked. My eyes locked on the shadow outside. It moved closer, its form clearer now, as if Robert were standing just beyond the glass. Meaning, more accessible, Sarah said, her voice cracking. Easier to manage when you're too old to manage them yourself. The shadow nodded, and the amulet burned hotter, as if confirming my suspicions. Mom, you're putting words in my mouth, Sarah added quickly, but the lie was threadbare. I asked, turning from the window, my voice steady as stone. Or am I finally hearing the words you've been dancing around for months? Sarah started crying, then soft sobs that sounded genuine but felt like a performance. I love you, Mom. I do. But I also have children to think about, college tuitions, mortgage payments. I thought having a better understanding of our future inheritance would help us plan better. There it was, the truth, wrapped in pretty paper, but still ugly. Your future inheritance. I repeated, my voice low, dangerous. Not my present life, but your future windfall. That's not fair, Sarah said, her sobs intensifying. We do care how you're feeling. No, I said, my voice cutting through her tears like a blade. You care how long you think I have left. The silence that followed was a chasm deep and unbridgeable. The amulet pulsed, its energy coursing through me, and the shadow outside seemed to lean closer, its presence a quiet strength. I moved to Robert's recliner, sinking into it, the journal on the coffee table glowing faintly in the dim light. Sarah Fair would have been my children visiting me because they missed me, not because they wanted to assess my assets. Fair would have been phone calls, asking how I'm feeling, not how I'm managing my money. We're worried about you, she said, her voice small, almost desperate. You're living alone in a house that's too big. You never go anywhere. You don't date. I'm a widow, Sarah. I interrupted, my voice rising. I lost the love of my life. Forgive me if I'm not ready to sign up for ballroom dancing classes and singles mixers. Her voice softened, but it felt calculated, like a chess move. I know, Mama. I know how much you loved Dad. But he wouldn't want you to stop living. I haven't stopped living, I said, my fingers tightening around the amulet. I've simply started living on my own terms, instead of everyone else's expectations. And the will stands. Both you and David have shown me exactly how much I can trust you with my future. The answer is not at all. Mom, please, Sarah said, her voice breaking. I understand why you're upset with David. That message was horrible. But I've never said anything like that about you. I've never wished you would die so I could inherit your money. She was right. Sarah had never been as crude as David, but she'd been his accomplice, her concern a polished mask for greed. I stood, moving to the desk where the journal seemed to hum with the same energy as the amulet. Sarah, when you and David discussed my living situation, you didn't push back. You didn't defend me. You played along. I was worried about you, she insisted, but the words felt hollow, like a script she'd rehearsed too many times. Worried about me or worried about your future? I asked, opening the journal to a random page. Robert's handwriting leaped out at me. Sarah's the one to watch Maggie. She's smarter than David, more subtle. Don't let her tears fool you. My breath caught. Robert had known even then that Sarah's betrayal would cut deeper. Mom, I love you, Sarah said, her voice trembling. I do. Please don't cut me out like this. The shadow outside moved closer, its form almost solid now, and the roses flared briefly, their glow casting eerie patterns across the room. I felt Robert's presence stronger than ever, his warning echoing in my mind. Sarah, if you love me, then prove it. I said, my voice steady, unyielding. Prove it by not contacting me about money, not asking about my will, not checking on my finances. Prove it by leaving me alone to live my life without wondering if my own children are plotting against me. The silence stretched heavy and final. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely audible. What happens now? Now, I said, my eyes on the journal. You learn to love me for who I am, not what I'm worth. Or you learn to live without either. The will is final. The trust documents are filed. The protection plan is in effect. If you or David make any further attempts to manipulate my living situation, my finances, or my decisions, every penny goes to charity. Mom, you can't mean that, she whispered. I've never meant anything more in my life, I said and hung up. The silence that followed was profound, broken only by the faint hum of the amulet and the soft creak of the house. I set the phone down, my hands steady, and picked up the journal. Robert's words stared back at me, each one a revelation. They're not just greedy, they're dangerous. I flipped to the next page and my heart stopped, a single sentence underlined twice. The amulet will show you the truth. Maggie, wear it when you sleep. I looked at the amulet, its silver surface glinting in the dim light. The roses outside pulsed again, and the shadow Robert's shadow seemed to nod, urging me forward. I slipped the amulet around my neck, its weight both comforting and unsettling. The room felt different now, as if the air itself were charged with possibility. I didn't know what Robert meant by the truth, but I knew one thing: Sarah's tears, like David's remorse, were part of a larger game, one I was only beginning to understand. I moved to the window, the roses glowing faintly, their petals trembling as if whispering secrets. The shadow was gone, but its presence lingered, a quiet assurance that I wasn't alone. I touched the amulet, its hum now a steady rhythm, and felt a surge of strength. Sarah's complicity had hurt, but it had also clarified something: I wasn't the vulnerable widow they thought I was. I was Margaret Thompson, armed with Robert's plan, guided by his foresight, and ready to face whatever darkness lay ahead. As I turned from the window, the journal caught my eye again. I opened it to another page, and there, tucked between the pages, was a small, folded note in Robert's handwriting. Maggie, the amulet sees what you cannot. Trust it. Trust yourself. The next step is in your dreams. My pulse quickened. Dreams I hadn't dreamed since Robert's death, my nights filled with restless silence. But the amulet's warmth, the journal's warnings, the rose's glow, they all pointed to something beyond the ordinary. Something Robert had known and prepared me for. I clutched the amulet, its energy coursing through me, and made a decision. Tonight I would wear it to sleep. Tonight I would see what truth Robert had left for me. And tomorrow, I would be ready not just for David and Sarah, but for the darkness that waited beyond their greed. The house was quiet, but it thrummed with a new energy, as if it had exhaled a long-held breath. I stood in the kitchen, the apple pie, David's favorite, a symbol of a love now broken, staring back at me from the counter. Its golden crust, once a gesture of maternal devotion, felt like a chain I'd worn too long. I picked it up, the weight heavy in my hands, and carried it to the trash bin. With a single deliberate motion, I tipped it in, the thud of crust against plastic, echoing like a door slamming shut. No more baking for those who saw me as a means to an end. No more playing the doting mother to children who plotted my demise. I touched the silver amulet around my neck, its compass-like symbol warm against my skin, pulsing faintly as it had since I'd opened the attic trunk. Robert's journal, now resting on the coffee table, had warned me, they're not just greedy, they're dangerous. His latest note, tucked between its pages, had been even more cryptic. The amulet sees what you cannot. Wear it when you sleep. Last night, I'd hesitated too raw from Sarah's tearful call and David's betrayal to face whatever truth Robert had left for me. But the amulet's steady hum, synchronized with my heartbeat, felt like a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. I moved to the living room, sinking into Robert's recliner, the leather worn smooth by years of his presence. The roses outside the window no longer glowed their petals, a soft crimson in the afternoon light, but the shadow I'd seen, Robert's shadow, I was sure lingered in my mind. It had watched me during my confrontations with David and Sarah, a silent guardian urging me forward. The journal, the amulet, the carved stone from the garden. They were pieces of a puzzle. Robert had left a plan that felt less like legal maneuvering and more like a spell woven to protect me. My phone buzzed a text from James Morrison's assistant. All documents filed and notarized. The trust is secure. Call if you need anything. I smiled, a weight lifting from my chest. The protection plan, Robert's failsafe against our children's greed, was now ironclad. David and Sarah would inherit nothing unless they proved their love without strings, a test I doubted they'd pass. For the first time in years, I felt unburdened, as if the grief that had tethered me to this house, to their expectations, had begun to unravel. I stood the amulet pulsing gently and walked to the mirror in the hallway. The woman staring back wasn't the useless old hag David had described. She was Margaret Thompson, 64, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that held both sorrow and steel. I'd balanced our family's finances for 37 years while Robert built his dental practice. I'd tended his roses through 3 years of widowhood, keeping his memory alive. I'd survived the loss of the man I loved, and now the betrayal of the children I'd raised. I was no victim. The amulet warmed, and a memory surfaced, Robert's voice, soft but firm during one of his final days in the hospital. Maggie, you're stronger than you know. Don't let anyone make you forget that. I hadn't believed him then, consumed by the fear of losing him. But now, with the amulet's hum and the journal's warnings, I felt that strength stirring like a fire kindled deep within. I returned to the kitchen, needing to move, to act. The trash bin with the discarded pie caught my eye. It wasn't enough to throw it away. I needed to reclaim this space, this life for myself. I opened the fridge, pulling out ingredients, not for David, not for Sarah, but for me. I'd always loved lemon tarts, their sharp brightness, a contrast to the heavy sweetness of apple pie. I hadn't made one in years, too busy catering to others' tastes. Today, that changed. As I grated lemon zest, the amulet pulsed stronger, and the air in the kitchen shifted as if charged with static. I glanced at the roses outside, expecting their glow, but they remained still. Instead, a faint hum came from the living room, the old turntable, untouched since Robert's death, spinning to life. A jazz record, his favorite, began to play its notes, soft and haunting. My hands froze, the grater slipping to the counter. Robert. I whispered, my voice barely audible over the music. The amulet burned hot now, and I felt a presence warm and familiar, like his hand on my shoulder. I moved to the living room, the journal glowing faintly on the coffee table, its pages fluttering, though no breeze stirred the room. The music swelled, and for a moment I swore I saw him, Robert, standing by the turntable, his smile as bright as it had been before the cancer. He was gone in a blink, but the journal's pages settled open to a new entry. Maggie, you're free now. Live for yourself. The amulet will guide you. My breath caught. Was this real, or was grief playing tricks? The amulet's warmth, the journal's words, the roses, the shadow, they felt like more than coincidence. Robert had always believed in signs and forces beyond the ordinary. The world speaks if you listen. He'd said, his eyes twinkling. I'd laughed then, but now with the amulet's pulse and the journal's guidance, I listened. I returned to the kitchen, finishing the lemon tart with a newfound purpose. The act felt like a ritual, a reclaiming of my joy. As the tart baked, its citrus scent filling the house, I sat with the journal, reading more of Robert's words. The amulet sees what you cannot. Trust it in your dreams. The note from last night echoed in my mind, and I knew I couldn't delay any longer. Tonight I would wear the amulet to sleep, ready to face whatever truth it revealed. The phone buzzed again. Another text from James's assistant, additional documents found in Mr. Thompson's safe. Meet tomorrow to review. My pulse quickened. More documents. Robert's foresight was uncanny, each step of his plan unfolding like a map I hadn't yet read. I replied, confirming the meeting, then stood the amulet's warmth, a steady anchor. I walked to the garden, the roses soft in the twilight. The carved stone spot in the soil was empty now, but the roses seemed to nod their petals, catching the last light. I knelt, touching the earth where Robert had worked his hands steady even in his final days. "You're still here, aren't you?" I whispered. The air stirred, and for a moment I felt him a warmth, a presence, a promise. Back inside, I plated the lemon tart, its golden crust a small triumph. I took a bite, the sharp sweetness bursting on my tongue, and smiled. This was for me, not for children who saw me as a stepping stone to wealth. The amulet pulsed, as if approving, and the jazz record played on its notes a lullaby of freedom. I moved to the bedroom, the journal and amulet in hand. The house felt different now, lighter, as if it too had shed a burden. I slipped under the covers, the amulet around my neck, its warmth a steady comfort. As I closed my eyes, the journal's words echoed, "The amulet will guide you." I didn't know what dreams awaited, but I was ready. Ready to live for myself, to uncover Robert's truths, to face whatever darkness lay ahead. The last thing I saw before sleep was the roses through the window, their petals faintly glowing, and the shadow, Robert's shadow, standing watch. I wasn't alone. I never had been. And as sleep claimed me, the amulet hummed a promise that tomorrow I'd be stronger still. The lemon tart's sharp sweetness lingered on my tongue as I sat in the living room, the silver amulet around my neck pulsing faintly, a constant reminder of Robert's unseen presence. Last night's sleep had been restless, the amulet's warmth stirring dreams I couldn't fully recall, flashes of roses glowing crimson, a shadow that spoke in Robert's voice, and a locked door I couldn't open. Robert's journal, now open on the coffee table, had promised the amulet would show me the truth in my dreams, but the truth remained elusive, a puzzle piece just out of reach. The journal's latest note: "The next step is in your dreams," haunted me, urging me to trust the amulet's power, to trust myself. The house was quiet, but it thrummed with a strange energy as if it were waiting for something. The roses outside, no longer glowing, stood sentinel in the morning light, their petals trembling in a breeze I couldn't feel. The carved stone from the garden, now tucked in my pocket, felt heavier today, its compass-like symbol matching the amulet's. Robert's protections, legal, mystical, or both, were unraveling a truth I wasn't sure I was ready to face. But after confronting David Clare and Sarah, I felt a strength I hadn't known I possessed, a fire kindled by betrayal and fueled by Robert's foresight. The doorbell rang, sharp and unexpected, pulling me from my thoughts. My heart quickened, the amulet pulsing hotter against my chest. I wasn't expecting anyone. James Morrison's meeting to review the additional documents wasn't until tomorrow. I moved to the window, peering through the curtains. David stood on the porch alone, his shoulders hunched, his face pale and drawn. No Claire, no polished smile. Just my son, looking like the boy who'd once stolen quarters from my purse to buy candy, then confessed with tearful guilt. I opened the door, the amulet's warmth steadying me. "David," I said, my voice calm but guarded. "What are you doing here?" He looked up, his eyes red-rimmed as if he hadn't slept. "Mom, I need to talk to you. Please." I hesitated, the journal's warning echoing in my mind. They're not just greedy. They're dangerous. But the amulet's pulse felt reassuring, urging me to listen, to test him. I stepped aside, gesturing to the living room. "Come in, but don't expect coffee." He entered his movements slow, as if carrying a weight I couldn't see. The roses outside caught my eye, their petals stirring faintly, and for a moment, I swore I saw the shadow, Robert's shadow, flicker among them, watching. David sat on the sofa, his hands clasped tightly. His gaze fixed on the floor, the journal on the coffee table seemed to hum, its pages fluttering slightly, though no breeze stirred the room. "Mom," he began, his voice low. "I'm sorry. What you heard in that message, it was awful, unforgivable. I didn't mean it not the way it sounded." The amulet burned hotter, and I felt a surge of clarity as if it were sharpening my senses. I sat across from him, my hands folded, the stone in my pocket, a quiet anchor. "You called me a useless old hag, David. You talked about my death like it was a business transaction. Explain how that doesn't mean what it sounds like." He flinched, his hands tightening. I was angry, frustrated. Claire and I have been struggling, debts, bills, the kids' school fees. I know that's no excuse, but I was venting to her, not thinking you'd ever hear it. Venting. I repeated, my voice sharp. You were venting about waiting for me to die so you could spend my money in Paris. He looked up, his eyes pleading. It wasn't about you, Mom. It was about the pressure we're under. The mortgage, the credit cards, it's been overwhelming. I got caught up in thinking about the future, about what we'd do if, when. When I'm gone, I finished, my voice cold. The amulet pulsed, and the roses outside seemed to flare briefly, their crimson light spilling through the window. The shadow flickered again, closer. Now its form almost solid. I kept my eyes on David, searching for the boy I had raised. But all I saw was a man drowning in his own excuses. I didn't mean it like that, he said, his voice breaking. I love you, Mom. I do. I've been a terrible son, but I want to fix this. The amulet's heat intensified, and I felt a strange clarity, as if it were peeling back the layers of his words. Do you remember when you were 10? I asked, leaning forward. You took $5 from my purse to buy candy at the corner store. You came home crying, confessed before I even noticed it was gone. You said you'd never do it again because you didn't want to hurt me. David's eyes widened, a flicker of shame crossing his face. I remember. You're not that boy anymore, I said, my voice steady but heavy with sorrow. That boy wouldn't have called his mother a hag. That boy wouldn't have booked a Paris trip with money he hadn't earned. That boy wouldn't have plotted to push me into a retirement home to liquidate my assets. I'm still him, David insisted, leaning forward, his hands outstretched. I've made mistakes, huge ones, but I'm here because I want to make it right. Please, Mom, give me a chance. The amulet burned, and the journal's pages fluttered again, settling on a new entry I hadn't read. Maggie, trust your instincts. Their remorse is a mask for desperation. My breath caught. Robert had known even then that David's apologies might come, but not from love, from fear of losing what he thought was his. What do you want, David? I asked, my voice low, dangerous. What are you really here for? He hesitated, his eyes darting to the journal, then back to me. I want to fix our relationship. I want to be your son again, not someone who disappoints you. The roses flared brighter, their light casting eerie shadows across the room, and the amulet's pulse quickened, as if warning me. I stood moving to the window where the shadow, Robert's shadow, stood clearer, now its eyes fixed on David. Then prove it, I said, turning to face him. Prove you love me without expecting a dime. Stay away from my finances, my house, my will. Don't call, don't visit, don't ask for anything for 1 year. If you can do that, maybe we can talk about forgiveness. David's face crumpled, but there was something else in his eyes. A flicker of calculation quickly masked. "A year," he asked, his voice small. "That's a long time, Mom. Not as long as I've loved you," I said, my voice softening despite myself. "Not as long as I have believed in you, only to hear you call me useless." He stood, his hands shaking. "I'll do it. I'll prove it. I swear." I nodded, but the amulet's heat told me to stay wary. "We'll see, David. Actions speak louder than promises." He moved toward the door, pausing to look back. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." I didn't respond, letting the silence answer for me. As he left the door, closing softly behind him, the roses dimmed, their glow fading to a natural red. The shadow lingered, watching until David's car disappeared down the street. I touched the amulet, its warmth now a steady comfort, and picked up the journal. Robert's words stared back at me. "Their remorse is a mask for desperation." I closed it, my heart heavy but resolute. I moved to the kitchen, needing to ground myself. The lemon tart's remnants sat on the counter, a reminder of the life I was reclaiming. I poured a glass of wine, the deep red catching the light like the roses. As I sipped, the amulet pulsed, and a memory surfaced: David at 10, his tearful confession, his small hand in mine. I'd forgiven him then, believing in his goodness. Now I wasn't so sure. The phone buzzed, a text from James Morrison. "Found something unusual in Robert's documents. Can we meet sooner?" My pulse quickened. Unusual. The journal. The amulet. The stone. They were already beyond ordinary. What else had Robert left me? I walked to the garden. The roses soft in the evening light. The shadow was gone, but its presence lingered, a quiet assurance. I knelt by the rose bushes, touching the soil where I'd found the stone. "You knew, didn't you?" I whispered to Robert. The air stirred, and for a moment I felt him, a warmth, a promise. Back inside, I opened the journal to a new page, my hands trembling. Robert's handwriting was clear, urgent. "Maggie, the amulet will show you their true intentions. Wear it tonight. The dreams will guide you." I clutched the amulet, its hum now a steady rhythm, and felt a surge of strength. David's apology, heartfelt or not, was a test one I'd passed by standing firm. But the journal's warning, the amulet's power, the shadow's watch, they pointed to a deeper truth, a danger I hadn't yet faced. I slipped the amulet back around my neck, its weight a reminder of my own power. Tonight I would sleep with it, ready to face the dreams Robert promised. Tonight I would see what lay beyond David's remorse, beyond Sarah's tears. And tomorrow I would be ready for whatever truth the amulet revealed. The amulet hung heavy around my neck, its silver surface warm and pulsing, as if it were alive with Robert's will. Last night's dreams had been vivid, but fragmented. Crimson roses blooming in a storm, a shadow whispering my name, a locked door that burned under my touch. Robert's journal, now a constant companion on the coffee table, had promised the amulet would reveal the truth in my dreams, but the truth remained just out of reach, a riddle wrapped in shadows. His words, "They're not just greedy, they're dangerous," echoed in my mind, a warning that kept me vigilant. David's apology yesterday, tearful and desperate, had been a test I'd passed by standing firm, but I knew the game wasn't over. Sarah, my daughter, was the sharper blade, her betrayal subtler, her motives harder to pin down. The morning was quiet. The house bathed in soft light, but the air felt charged, as if it anticipated a storm. The roses in the garden stood still, their petals no longer glowing, but trembling faintly, as if they sensed what I did, Sarah would come next. Robert's journal had warned me Sarah's the one to watch Maggie. She's smarter than David, more subtle. Don't let her tears fool you. The amulet pulsed in agreement, its warmth a steady anchor as I prepared for the day. I'd scheduled a meeting with James Morrison tomorrow to review the unusual documents he'd found in Robert's safe, but today I suspected would bring its own revelations. The doorbell rang at noon, sharp and deliberate, pulling me from my thoughts. I moved to the window, peering through the curtains. Sarah stood on the porch alone, holding a covered dish and wearing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. My heart tightened, not with fear, but with resolve. The amulet burned hotter, and the roses outside stirred their petals, catching the light in a way that felt unnatural. I opened the door, my face a calm mask. "Sarah," I said, my voice steady, "this is a surprise." "Hi, Mom." She said, her tone warm, but calculated, like a chess player moving a pawn. "I brought you something, your favorite lemon tarts. I thought we could talk." The amulet pulsed, and I felt a surge of clarity as if it were sharpening my senses. Lemon tarts. A deliberate choice, echoing the one I'd made for myself after discarding David's pie. She was playing a new game, one designed to disarm me. I stepped aside, gesturing to the living room. "Come in. Let's see how good your baking's gotten." She laughed, a sound that might have fooled me a week ago, and set the dish on the coffee table next to Robert's journal. The pages fluttered slightly, though no breeze stirred the room, and the amulet's heat intensified. Sarah didn't notice, her eyes flicking around the room over the antique furniture, the family photos, the roses visible through the window. It wasn't admiration, it was assessment, just as David and Claire had done. But Sarah was different. Her gaze sharper, her smile a carefully crafted weapon. "These are beautiful," she said, nodding at the roses. "Dad's roses, right? They look brighter than I remember." "They're thriving," I said, my voice neutral, my hand brushing the amulet. "Funny how they seem to know things I don't." Her smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly, sitting on the sofa and uncovering the tarts. Their citrus scent filled the room, a mocking echo of my own reclaiming act. "I wanted to apologize, Mom," she said, her voice soft, her eyes wide with feigned sincerity, "for everything with David, for not being there enough. I've been so caught up with the kids and work, I didn't realize how much you've been going through." The amulet burned, and I saw the shadow Robert's shadow flicker outside the window, its form clearer now, standing among the roses. My pulse quickened, but I kept my face calm. "You've been busy," I said, sitting across from her, my hands folded. "But you found time to talk to David about my living situation." Her eyes flickered a crack in her composure. "That was a misunderstanding, Mom. I was worried about you, not trying to push you into anything." "Worried?" I repeated, my voice slow, deliberate. "Like when you suggested I move to a senior community near your house, or when you asked about my finances, wondering if I was managing okay." She leaned forward. Her hands clasped, her voice earnest. "I know it came across wrong, but I was thinking about your future. You deserve to enjoy life, not be stuck maintaining this big house. Have you thought about traveling? Maybe taking a cruise or one of those European tours? You could join a cooking class, learn something new." The amulet pulsed hotter, and the journal's pages fluttered again, settling on a new entry. "Maggie, she'll try to make you spend it all. Don't fall for her kindness." My breath caught. Robert had anticipated this, Sarah's new tactic, not to push me into a retirement home, but to drain my resources, to make the will irrelevant by leaving nothing for charity. I stood moving to the window where the roses seemed to glow faintly, their light casting eerie patterns across the room. "Travel," I said, turning to face her, my voice light but sharp. "That's a lovely idea, Sarah." But I'd need money for that, wouldn't I? Money you and David seem very interested in. Her smile tightened, but she didn't flinch. Mom, I'm not interested in your money. I want you to be happy to live your life to the fullest. Dad would have wanted that. The shadow outside moved closer, its eyes fixed on Sarah, and the amulet burned, urging me to see through her words. Your father wanted a lot of things. I said, my voice steady. Mostly, he wanted me to be safe. From anyone who might try to manipulate me, even my own children. Sarah's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, her voice softening. I'm not manipulating you, Mom. I'm trying to help you see that you don't need to stay tied to this house to Dad's memory. You could sell it, use the money to do something for yourself. The roses flared brighter, their glow spilling into the room, and the shadow Robert's shadow seemed to nod, as if confirming my suspicions. I stepped closer, the amulet's heat fueling my resolve. And what happens when I've spent it all, Sarah? When there's nothing left for you or David to inherit? Her face paled, but she held her ground, her voice trembling with feigned hurt. That's not what this is about. I want you to be happy, not to struggle alone. Alone? I asked, my voice rising sharp as a blade. I'm not the one struggling, Sarah. You are. You and David, with your debts, your plans, your Paris trips. You think I don't see it. You think I don't know. You've been talking about my money behind my back, she stood, her hands shaking, her eyes bright with tears. Mom, that's unfair. I've never said anything like David did. I've never called you names or wished you'd die. I'm here because I love you. The amulet burned hotter, and the journal's pages fluttered again, revealing another line. Her kindness is a trap, Maggie. She wants you to spend it all, so there's nothing left to protect. I felt a surge of strength, as if Robert were standing beside me, guiding my words. Love doesn't come with an agenda, Sarah. I said, my voice low, unyielding. Love doesn't ask me to sell my home or spend my savings so you can feel secure about your future. Her tears fell now, but they felt like a performance, a final move in a carefully planned game. Mom, please, she whispered. I'm not like David. I'm not trying to hurt you. Then stop, I said, stepping closer. The amulet's pulse synchronized with my heartbeat. Stop pretending you're here for me when you're here for what I have. Stop acting like my daughter when you've been plotting with your brother to control my life. The silence was deafening, broken only by the faint hum of the journal and the rose's eerie glow. Sarah's face crumpled, but her eyes held a flicker of something else. Anger, perhaps, or desperation. You're wrong about me, she said, her voice barely audible. But if that's what you think, I'll go. Do that, I said, my voice cold but steady. And Sarah, don't come back until you can love me without expecting anything in return. She gathered her purse, leaving the tarts on the table, and moved to the door. As she stepped outside, the roses dimmed their glow, fading to a natural red, and the shadow vanished as if satisfied. I closed the door behind her, the sound final, like a lock clicking into place. I returned to the living room, the amulet still warm, the journal open to Robert's warning. I picked it up, flipping to a new page, and my heart stopped. A single sentence written in Robert's urgent scrawl. Maggie, the amulet will protect you, but you must face the truth in your dreams. They're closer than you think. My pulse quickened. Closer than I thought. The dreams, the roses, the shadow, they were all leading me somewhere to a truth I hadn't yet grasped. I touched the amulet, its hum, now a steady rhythm, and felt a surge of strength. Sarah's visit had been a test one I'd passed by seeing through her subtle manipulation. But the journal's warning, the amulet's power, the shadow's watch, they pointed to a danger beyond greed, a darkness Robert had foreseen. I moved to the kitchen, pouring a glass of wine, the deep red catching the light like the roses. As I sipped, I made a decision tonight. I would wear the amulet to sleep, ready to face the dreams Robert promised. Tonight, I would see the truth. The house creaked as if in agreement, and the roses outside stood sentinel, their petals trembling faintly. I wasn't alone. Robert's plan, legal, mystical, or both, was unfolding, and I was ready to follow it to claim the life I deserved, no matter what lay ahead. The amulet pulsed against my chest, its warmth a steady heartbeat as I drove to James Morrison's office. Robert's journal tucked securely in my bag. Last night's dreams had been vivid, chaotic, a storm of glowing roses, a shadow with Robert's face, and a locked door that burned under my touch. His words, "The amulet will show you the truth," had echoed through the fragments, but the truth remained elusive, a shadow just beyond my grasp. The journal's latest warning, "They're closer than you think," had kept me awake, the amulet's hum urging me to stay vigilant. Sarah's subtle manipulation yesterday, cloaked in lemon tarts and false concern, had confirmed what I already knew: my children's greed ran deeper than I had imagined. But Robert's plan, legal, mystical, or both, was unfolding. And today with James, I'd uncover its next piece. The law office was quiet, its wood-paneled walls and leather chairs a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. James greeted me with a warm but cautious smile, his eyes flicking to the journal as I set it on his desk. "Margaret," he said, gesturing to a chair, "I'm glad you could come early. What we found in Robert's safe, it's significant." The amulet pulsed hotter, and I felt a strange energy in the room, as if Robert were watching. "You mentioned unusual documents," I said, my voice steady despite the knot in my stomach. "What are they?" James opened a thick folder, his expression grave. Robert was meticulous more than I realized. He didn't just plan for your financial protection, he planned for your safety. He slid a stack of papers across the desk, each one stamped with official seals. "These are reports from a private investigator he hired 2 years before his death during his cancer treatments." "Private investigator!" My breath caught the amulet burning against my skin. Why would Robert hire a PI? James leaned back, his fingers steepled. "He suspected your children were planning ahead, shall we say. He didn't want to alarm you, but he wanted evidence in case his fears were confirmed." I opened the folder, my hands trembling as I scanned the pages. The reports were detailed, clinical, devastating. David and Claire's financial records showed debts piling up: $230,000 in credit cards, a second mortgage, unpaid school fees. Sarah and her husband Tom weren't far behind, with $150,000 in loans and a maxed-out line of credit. The investigator had tracked their communications, emails, texts, even recorded phone calls, revealing discussions about my assets, my house, my longevity. One email from David to Claire, dated a year ago, made my blood run cold. "She's tougher than we thought. We need to start planning for when she's gone." The amulet pulsed, and the room seemed to dim, the air heavy with a presence I couldn't name. I looked up at James, my voice barely above a whisper. "Robert knew they were plotting against me." "He suspected," James said, his tone gentle but firm. "He loved you too much to take chances. But there's more." He pulled out a sealed envelope, Robert's handwriting scrawled across it. "For Maggie, when the time comes." My heart pounded as I opened it, revealing a single sheet of paper, a letter from Robert. "Maggie, my love. If you're reading this, you've seen the truth about our children. I'm sorry I couldn't spare you this pain. I saw the signs during my treatments, David's questions about our finances, Sarah's subtle nudging about your future. I hired Daniel Rivers, API, to confirm my fears. They're not just greedy, they're desperate. and desperation makes people dangerous. I've set protections in place, legal and otherwise, to keep you safe. The amulet is more than a keepsake, it's a guide. Trust it. Trust yourself. Check the safe in my study for the final piece. I'll always be with you. Yours forever, Robert. Tears stung my eyes, but the amulet's warmth steadied me as if Robert's hand were on my shoulder. The safe, I said, looking at James. What's in it? James hesitated, his eyes darkening. Something we didn't expect. Robert left instructions to open it only if certain conditions were met, specifically if your children attempted to manipulate or harm you. He pulled out another document. This one, a life insurance policy. And my heart stopped. It was in my name, taken out by David for $2 million, with a double indemnity clause, $4 million, if I died in an accident. The room spun, the amulet burning so hot I gasped. David took out a policy on my life. My voice trembled, not with fear, but with rage. When 6 months ago, James said, his voice heavy, the investigator found it buried in public records. David and Claire are the beneficiaries, with Sarah as a secondary. The journal on the desk fluttered its pages, settling on a new entry. Maggie, the amulet will protect you from their darkest plans. My hands shook as I touched it, the words blurring through my tears. Robert had known not just about their greed, but about a threat I hadn't dared imagine. A policy that paid double for an accident wasn't just foresight, it was a motive. There's more, James said, sliding another document across the desk. Robert set up a secret trust, one even I didn't know about until yesterday. It's worth $3.2 million, hidden in an offshore account accessible only to you. He ensured it couldn't be traced by David, Sarah, or anyone else. I stared at the papers, the numbers swimming before my eyes. 3.2 million. Robert had hidden a fortune, not for himself, not for our children, but for me, to protect me, to give me freedom. The amulet pulsed, and for a moment I swore I saw him, Robert, standing in the corner of the room, his smile faint but proud. The vision vanished, but the air thrummed with his presence. The roses outside the office window glowing faintly, their crimson light spilling through the glass. Why didn't he tell me? I whispered, my voice breaking. Why keep all of this a secret? James leaned forward, his eyes kind but resolute. He didn't want to burden you, Margaret. He knew you loved David and Sarah, and he hoped he was wrong about them. But he wasn't taking chances. The PI, the trust, the amulet, he wanted you to have everything you needed to protect yourself, even if he wasn't here. The amulet burned, and the journal's pages fluttered again, revealing another line. The amulet sees their hearts, Maggie. Wear it always. I touched it, its warmth spreading through me, and felt a surge of strength. Robert hadn't just planned for my safety. He'd armed me with tools to see the truth, to fight back. The insurance policy, the debts, the secret trust, they were pieces of a puzzle, a web of greed and danger my children had woven. But I wasn't their prey. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was done being underestimated. What do I do now? I asked, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. James handed me a key, small and ornate, etched with the same compass-like symbol as the amulet. This is for the safe in Robert's study. He left instructions for you to open it alone. Whatever's inside, he wanted you to see it first. I took the key, its weight heavy in my palm, and felt the amulet pulse in sync. The roses outside flared brighter, their glow casting eerie shadows across the room, and for a moment, I saw Robert's shadow again standing among them, nodding. "Thank you, James," I said, standing the journal and key clutched tightly. "I'll call you after I've seen what's in the safe." As I drove home, the amulet hummed, its energy coursing through me. The journal sat in the passenger seat, its pages still, but I felt its power, as if Robert's words were alive, guiding me. The insurance policy burned in my mind 4 million if I died in an accident. David's voice message. Sarah's tears, their subtle pushes toward senior living. It all pointed to a plan one Robert had foreseen. But the amulet, the journal, the roses, they were more than protections. They were a call to action, a reminder of my own strength. I pulled into the driveway, the roses glowing faintly in the twilight, their petals trembling as if whispering secrets. The house felt different now, alive with Robert's presence. I moved to the study where his old safe sat behind a portrait of us on our wedding day. My hands trembled as I inserted the key, the lock clicking open with a soft hum that matched the amulet's pulse. Inside was a small box also etched with the compass symbol and a folded note in Robert's handwriting. I opened the note first, my heart pounding Maggie. This box holds the final piece of the plan. The amulet will show you how to use it. Trust your dreams. Trust yourself. I'm with you always. Tears fell as I lifted the box, its surface warm, as if infused with the same energy as the amulet. I didn't open it, not yet. The amulet burned, urging me to wait to sleep to let the dreams reveal the next step. I moved to the living room, sinking into Robert's recliner, the box and journal beside me. The roses outside glowed brighter, their light spilling through the window, and the shadow Robert's shadow stood watch. Its form clearer, now its eyes filled with love. I touched the amulet, its hum, a steady rhythm, and felt a surge of strength. David and Sarah's betrayal had shattered me, but Robert's plan had rebuilt me piece by piece into something stronger. Tonight, I would wear the amulet to sleep, ready to face the dreams it promised. Tonight, I would uncover the truth about the box, about my children, about the danger Robert had warned me of. And tomorrow, I would be ready not just to survive, but to fight, to live, to claim the life I deserved. The air in the house felt alive, charged with a restless energy that mirrored the pulse of the amulet around my neck. Its silver surface, etched with the compass-like symbol, burned against my skin, a constant reminder of Robert's presence. Last night's dreams had been vivid, almost tangible, crimson roses blooming in a storm, a shadow with Robert's face whispering warnings, and a locked door that opened to reveal a blinding light. The journal's words, "The amulet will protect you, but you must face the truth in your dreams," had guided me, and the small, ornate box from Robert's safe, still unopened, sat on my bedside table, humming with the same energy as the amulet, its note. The amulet will show you how to use it, promised answers, but I wasn't ready to face them, not yet. Today was about confronting the living, not the mysteries Robert had left behind. James Morrison had arranged the family meeting at his law office, a neutral ground where I could face David, Claire, Sarah, and Tom together. The revelations from yesterday, the private investigator's reports, the 2 million life insurance policy with a double indemnity clause, the hidden 3.2 million trust had shaken me to my core. My children's greed wasn't just a betrayal. It was a calculated threat, one Robert had foreseen with chilling precision. The amulet pulsed, urging me forward, and the roses in my garden, though no longer glowing, seemed to nod as I left the house, their petals trembling in a breeze I couldn't feel. The law office was stark, its wood-paneled walls and leather chairs a cold contrast to the fire burning inside me. James greeted me at the door, his expression a mix of concern and resolve. "Margaret, are you sure you're ready for this?" he asked, his eyes flicking to the journal in my bag, its pages faintly humming with an energy only I seemed to feel. "I've never been more ready," I said, my voice steady, the amulet's warmth fueling my strength. "They need to know I see them for what they are." He nodded, leading me to a conference room where a long mahogany table waited surrounded by chairs. The roses outside the window caught my eye, their crimson petals unnaturally vibrant, and for a moment I saw Robert's shadow among them, his form clearer than ever watching. The amulet pulsed, as if in sync with his presence, and I felt a surge of resolve. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a reckoning. David and Claire arrived first, their faces pale, their smiles absent. David's eyes darted to me, then away, as if he couldn't bear my gaze. Claire clutched her purse, her knuckles white, her usual polish replaced by a nervous edge. Sarah and Tom followed Sarah's face, a mask of concern. Tom's expression guarded his jaw tight. They sat across from me the table, a battleground, the air thick with tension. James stood at the head, his folder of documents open, but it was my voice that would set the tone. "Thank you for coming." I began, my voice calm but sharp, the amulet burning against my chest. I wanted us all here to clear the air to address some misunderstandings about my future and your expectations. David shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped tightly. "Mom, I told you I'm sorry about the message. I'm trying to make things right." Sarah nodded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "We both are Mom. We love you. We just want what's best for you." The amulet pulsed hotter, and the roses outside flared briefly, their glow casting eerie shadows across the room. I felt Robert's presence, strong and unwavering, urging me to see through their words. "What's best for me?" I said, leaning forward. "Or what's best for your bank accounts?" Claire gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but Sarah's face remained composed, her tears a calculated performance. Tom spoke up, his voice gruff. "That's unfair, Margaret. We're worried about you living alone, not your money." "Worried?" I repeated, my voice slow, deliberate. "Is that why David took out a $2 million life insurance policy on me with a clause that pays double if I die in an accident?" The room went silent, the air so heavy it seemed to press against my skin. David's face drained of color, his hands shaking as he gripped the table. Claire's eyes widened, her purse slipping to the floor. Sarah's composure cracked, her tears freezing as she stared at me. Tom's jaw clenched, his eyes darting to David, a silent accusation. "What are you talking about?" David stammered, his voice hoarse. "I didn't." "Don't." I interrupted, my voice cold as steel. I pulled the insurance policy from the folder James had given me, sliding it across the table. "Signed by you, David. 6 months ago. Beneficiaries you and Claire, with Sarah as a secondary." "Care to explain?" David's mouth opened, then closed, his eyes darting to Claire, who looked away. Sarah spoke up, her voice trembling but controlled. "Mom, this must be a mistake. David wouldn't do something like that without telling me. Wouldn't he?" I asked. My eyes locked on hers. The amulet burned, and the journal in my bag hummed faintly, its pages fluttering though no one touched it. "Because the private investigator your father hired says otherwise. He's been tracking your communications, your debts, your plans. $230,000 for you and Claire David. $150,000 for you and Tom Sarah. You've been discussing my house, my assets, my longevity for years." The roses flared brighter, their light spilling through the window, and Robert's shadow stood clearer now, his eyes fixed on my children. Sarah's face paled, her hands trembling. "Mom, we were worried about our families, our futures. That's not the same as wishing you harm." "Wishing me harm?" I repeated, standing now, my voice rising like a tide. "You didn't just wish Sarah. You planned. You suggested senior communities financial advisors' cruises to drain my savings. You wanted me out of this house, out of my life, so you could claim what's mine. David stood, his face flushed with desperation. Mom, that policy was a precaution, not a plan. I was trying to protect our family's future. Protect, I laughed, the sound sharp and bitter. The amulet pulsed, and the shadow outside seemed to nod, urging me forward. You protected yourself by betting on my death. You and Claire booked a Paris trip, David. Sarah, you and Tom talked about my longevity, like it was an obstacle. Oh, and you all thought I was too naive to see it. Claire started crying, her sobs loud and theatrical. Margaret, please. We love you. We made mistakes, but we're not monsters. The journal's pages fluttered again, revealing a new entry. Maggie, they'll beg, but their hearts are unchanged. Show them the truth. My breath caught, and I felt Robert's presence stronger than ever, as if he were standing beside me. I pulled another document from the folder, the secret trust worth $3.2 million hidden by Robert to protect me. Here's the truth, I said, sliding the trust papers across the table. Your father saw this coming. He knew you'd try to manipulate me to control my life for your own gain. So he hid this, a $3.2 million trust accessible only to me, untraceable by you. He hired a private investigator to watch you to document your greed, and he made sure my will protects me from you. David's eyes widened. As he scanned the papers, his hands shaking. Sarah's tears stopped her face hardening. Tom leaned forward, his voice low. This is insane, Margaret. You can't cut us out completely. We're your children. You stopped being my children when you started plotting my death, I said, my voice unyielding. The amulet burned, and the roses flared so brightly the room seemed to glow, their light casting shadows that danced like specters. Robert's shadow stood at the window, his form almost solid, his eyes filled with pride. You can't do this, David said, his voice breaking. We have rights! Rights! I stepped closer, the amulet's heat fueling my rage. You have no rights to my life, my home, my legacy. You've shown me exactly who you are, and I'm done pretending you're the children I raised. Sarah stood, her voice trembling but sharp. Mom, please. We can change. We can be better. The journal hummed, and I felt Robert's hand on my shoulder, a warmth that steadied me. Then prove it. I said, my voice soft but final. Stay out of my life for 5 years. No calls, no visits, no questions about my money. If you can love me without expecting anything, maybe we can talk. But until then, you're strangers to me. The silence was deafening, broken only by Claire's sobs and the faint hum of the journal. David's face crumpled, his hands shaking as he dropped the papers. Sarah's eyes blazed with anger, then softened, her tears returning. Tom's jaw clenched, his silence louder than words. They stood gathering their things, their faces a mix of shock, guilt, and defiance. As they moved to the door, I spoke one last time. And David, cancel that insurance policy. If anything happens to me, an accident, a fall, anything suspicious, James has instructions to turn everything over to the authorities. David froze, his back to me, then nodded once and left. Sarah lingered, her eyes searching mine, but I held her gaze unyielding. She followed the others, the door closing with a finality that echoed through the room. I sank into a chair, the amulet's warmth steadying me. James placed a hand on my shoulder, his voice gentle. You did what you had to, Margaret. Robert would be proud. I nodded, tears stinging my eyes, but I felt lighter, as if a weight had lifted. The roses outside dimmed, their glow fading to a natural red, and Robert's shadow vanished, his presence, a quiet assurance in my heart. I touched the amulet. Its hum now a soft rhythm, and picked up the journal. A new page revealed itself. Maggie, you've faced them. Now face the box. The truth awaits. My pulse quickened. The box from the safe, still unopened, was the final piece of Robert's plan. The amulet had guided me through this confrontation, sharpening my senses, strengthening my resolve. But the box, the dreams, the truth, they pointed to something bigger, something darker. I thanked James, promising to call after I opened the box, and drove home the journal and amulet, my constant companions. The house greeted me with a familiar hum, the roses soft in the evening light. I moved to the bedroom where the box sat on the bedside table, its surface warm, etched with the same symbol as the amulet. I didn't open it, not yet. The journal's words, the amulet's pulse, the rose's glow, they all urged me to wait to sleep to let the dreams reveal the next step. I slipped under the covers, the amulet around my neck, its warmth a steady comfort. As I closed my eyes, the house creaked, as if in approval, and the roses outside stood sentinelly, their petals trembling faintly. Robert's shadow lingered in my mind, his smile a promise that I wasn't alone. Tonight, I would face the dreams, the box, the truth. And tomorrow, I would be ready for whatever lay beyond my children's betrayal for the life I was reclaiming, for the strength I had always had. The amulet burned against my chest, its compass-like symbol pulsing with a heat that felt alive, as if Robert's spirit were urging me forward. Last night's dreams had been the clearest yet. A storm of crimson roses, a shadow with Robert's face speaking my name, and a locked door that opened to reveal a figure cloaked in darkness, holding a knife. The journal's words, "The amulet will protect you, but you must face the truth," had guided me, and the small, ornate box from Robert's safe, still unopened, hummed on my bedside table, its surface warm with the same energy as the amulet. The note inside had promised answers. The amulet will show you how to use it. But the truth it hinted at filled me with both dread and resolve. The family meeting yesterday had been a reckoning, stripping away the last illusions about my children David and Sarah and their spouses Claire and Tom. The $2 million life insurance policy with its double indemnity clause for an accidental death had revealed their greed as a threat, not just a betrayal. Robert's hidden $3.2 million. Trust, the private investigator's reports, the amulet's power. They were pieces of a puzzle he'd left to protect me. But the journal's latest warning, "They're closer than you think," echoed in my mind, a reminder that the danger wasn't over. The house was quiet. As I sat in Robert's recliner, the journal open on the coffee table, its pages still, but humming faintly. The roses in the garden stood sentinel, their petals trembling in the morning light, no longer glowing, but charged with an unseen energy. I hadn't opened the box yet, its weight too heavy, its secrets too vast. The amulet pulsed, urging me to wait, to trust the dreams. But a knock at the door shattered my thoughts, sharp and insistent like a warning. I moved to the window, peering through the curtains. A man stood on the porch, his face familiar but out of place, Daniel Rivers, the private investigator Robert had hired. My heart quickened, the amulet burning hotter. I opened the door, my voice steady despite the unease creeping up my spine. "Mr. Rivers," I said, stepping aside. "What brings you here?" He entered, his eyes scanning the room, his expression grim. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to talk. It's urgent." The amulet pulsed, and the roses outside stirred their petals, catching the light in a way that felt unnatural. I gestured to the sofa, my hand brushing the journal. "What's happened?" Daniel sat, pulling a small recorder from his pocket. "I've been monitoring your children as Robert instructed. After yesterday's meeting, I intercepted new communications, texts, calls, emails. They're not stopping, Mrs. Thompson. They're escalating." My stomach tightened, the amulet's heat spreading through me, escalating. How he pressed play on the recorder, and Sarah's voice filled the room low and urgent, speaking to Tom. She's cut us out completely, Tom. The trust, the will, everything's locked away. We can't wait any longer. We need to act now. Tom's voice, cold and deliberate, followed. An accident, then. Something simple, a fall, a fire. The policy pays double if it's not suspicious. The room spun, the amulet burning so hot I gasped. A fall. A fire. The insurance policy's double indemnity clause flashed in my mind $4 million if I died in an accident. The roses outside flared briefly, their crimson glow spilling through the window, and I saw Robert's shadow among them, his form clearer than ever, his eyes filled with warning. "They're planning to kill me," I whispered, my voice trembling, not with fear, but with rage. Daniel nodded, his face grim. "I've alerted the police, but you need to be careful. Sarah and Tom are desperate." David's pulling back. He's scared after the meeting, but Sarah's driving this now. She's smarter, more dangerous. The journal's pages fluttered, revealing a new entry, Maggie. The amulet sees their darkest plans. "Use the box now." My breath caught. The box. I hadn't opened it, too overwhelmed by the revelations, but the amulet's pulse and the journal's words were unmistakable. I stood moving to the bedroom, Daniel following. The box sat on the bedside table, its surface warm, etched with the same symbol as the amulet. I lifted it, my hands trembling, and felt a surge of energy as if Robert were guiding me. "Mrs. Thompson." "What is that?" Daniel asked, his voice tense. "Something Robert left me," I said, my voice steady. "A protection." I opened the box, revealing a small crystal vial filled with a shimmering liquid, glowing faintly like the roses. A note inside in Robert's handwriting read, "Maggie, the amulet activates the elixir. Drink it when the danger is closest. It will protect you." The amulet burned, and the vial hummed, its light pulsing in sync with my heartbeat. I didn't understand. How could a liquid protect me? But I trusted Robert, trusted the amulet, trusted the dreams. Before I could speak, the doorbell rang again, sharp and demanding. The amulet pulsed hotter, and the roses flared, their glow flooding the room. I moved to the window, my heart pounding. Sarah and Tom stood on the porch, Sarah's face pale but determined, Tom's expression hard, his hand in his pocket as if gripping something. Daniel's eyes darkened. "They're here," he said, pulling out his phone. "I'm calling the police now." I nodded, slipping the vial into my pocket, the amulet's heat steadying me. "Let them in," I said, my voice calm but laced with steel. "I want to hear what they have to say." Daniel hesitated, but complied, opening the door. Sarah stepped inside, her eyes wide with feigned concern. Tom closed behind his presence, looming like a storm cloud. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "We need to talk. I can't stop thinking about yesterday. I want to make things right." The amulet burned, and the journal hummed, its pages fluttering to a new warning. "Maggie, they're here to act. The elixir now." My heart raced, but I kept my face calm, gesturing to the living room. "Sit," I said, my voice steady, "but make it quick." Sarah sat, her hands clasped tightly, Tom standing behind her, his eyes scanning the room. The roses outside glowed brighter, and Robert's shadow stood among them, his form almost solid, his eyes fixed on Tom. "Mom," Sarah began, her voice soft. "I know you're angry, but I'm not like David. I want to fix this to be your daughter again." The amulet's heat intensified, and I felt a surge of clarity as if it were peeling back her words. "Fix this how I asked," my voice sharp. "By convincing me to sell my house, to spend my savings, or something else." Sarah's eyes flickered a crack in her composure. Tom stepped forward, in his voice low, menacing. Margaret, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We're family. Families work things out. The vial in my pocket hummed, and the amulet burned, urging me to act. I slipped my hand into my pocket, uncorking the vial, the liquid's glow faint but steady. Work things out. I repeated my voice, slow, deliberate. Like planning a fall, a fire. Something to trigger that $4 million insurance policy. Sarah's face paled, her hands shaking. Tom's eyes narrowed, his hand moving in his pocket, and the roses flared so brightly the room seemed to pulse with crimson light. "What are you talking about?" Sarah stammered, but her voice betrayed her thin and desperate. "Don't I?" said, stepping closer, the vial warm in my hand. "I know about the policy, Sarah. I know about your debts, your plans, your texts to Tom about an accident. I know you're not here to make things right. You're here to make sure I don't live long enough to spend what's mine." Tom lunged forward, his hand pulling a small knife from his pocket, its blade glinting in the rose-tinted light. "Enough, Margaret," he growled. "You're not as clever as you think." The amulet burned, and I raised the vial to my lips, drinking the glowing liquid in one swift motion. It tasted of honey and fire spreading warmth through my veins, and the room seemed to shift the air alive with whispers. Robert's shadow stepped forward, his form solid now, his eyes blazing with fury. Sarah screamed, stumbling back, and Tom froze, the knife trembling in his hand. "You can't touch her," a voice said. Not mine, but Robert's, echoing through the room, deep and resonant. The roses flared brighter, their light blinding, and the amulet pulsed in sync with my heartbeat. I felt invincible, as if the elixir had awakened something within me, a strength I hadn't known I possessed. Daniel moved, tackling Tom to the ground, the knife clattering across the floor. Sarah screamed again, her face a mask of terror, and I stood the amulet's heat, fueling my resolve. "You thought you could scare me," I said, my voice steady, powerful. "You thought I was weak alone. But I'm not alone. Robert's with me, and he's been watching you." The police burst through the door, their voices sharp, their guns drawn. "Hands up," an officer shouted, and Tom, pinned by Daniel, didn't resist. Sarah collapsed, sobbing. Her hands raised her tears, no longer a performance, but a surrender. The roses dimmed, their glow fading to a natural red, and Robert's shadow vanished, his presence a quiet warmth in my heart. As the police cuffed Tom and led Sarah away, Daniel turned to me, his face pale. "Mrs. Thompson, what was that? That voice, the light, what's happening?" I touched the amulet, its hum now soft, reassuring. "Robert," I said simply, "he's protecting me." The officers took statements confiscating the knife and the recorder and promised to follow up on the insurance policy and intercepted communications. As they left, the house fell silent, the journal still open on the coffee table, its pages calm. I sank into Robert's recliner, the vial empty in my hand. The amulet, a steady comfort. The elixir had worked how I didn't know, but it had shielded me, awakened me, made me untouchable in that moment of danger. I opened the journal, its final page revealing a new entry. "Maggie, you're safe now. The elixir was my last gift. Live free." Tears fell, but they were tears of relief, of triumph. Robert had seen the darkness coming, had woven a plan, legal, mystical, eternal, to protect me, and I had faced it not as a victim, but as Margaret Thompson, a woman stronger than her betrayers could ever imagine. The roses outside stood sentinel, their petals soft in the evening light. I wasn't alone. Robert's love, his foresight, his spirit, they were with me always. And as I closed the journal, the amulet pulsed one last time, A promise that the worst was over, that my life was mine to claim. The house was quiet, but it hummed with a gentle warmth, as if it had finally exhaled the weight of betrayal. The amulet around my neck, its compass-like symbol now cool against my skin, pulsed softly, a fading echo of Robert's presence. The roses in the garden stood still, their crimson petals soft in the morning light, no longer glowing, but alive with a quiet strength mirroring my own. The journal on the coffee table lay closed, its pages silent, its final message. Maggie, you're safe now. Live free, etched in my heart. The empty vial from Robert's safe, its shimmering elixir spent in the moment of danger, sat beside it, a testament to his love, his foresight, his unshakable belief in me. Yesterday's confrontation with Sarah and Tom had been the climax of a storm I hadn't seen coming. Their plan, a staged accident to trigger the $4 million insurance policy, had unraveled under the weight of Robert's protections, the private investigator's evidence, the police's intervention, and the elixir's mysterious power, which had shielded me when Tom's knife gleamed. Sarah's tears, Tom's rage, David's absence. They were shadows, now fading in the light of my victory. The police had taken them away, promising charges for conspiracy and attempted harm, and the insurance policy was under investigation. My children, once the center of my world, were strangers, their greed a wound that no longer bled. I stood in the kitchen, the scent of lemon tarts, my own, not Sarah's, filling the air. I'd baked them this morning, a ritual of reclaiming joy, of living for myself. The amulet pulsed faintly as if approving, and I smiled, the taste of citrus sharp on my tongue. Robert's journal had guided me through the darkness, its warnings and the amulet's power sharpening my instincts. But it was my strength, forged in grief, tempered by betrayal, that had carried me here. I wasn't the useless old hag David had called me. I was Margaret Thompson, 64, a widow who'd balanced a family's finances for decades, tended roses through loss, and faced her children's treachery with unyielding resolve. I moved to the living room, sinking into Robert's recliner, its leather warm with memories. The house felt different now, lighter, as if it too had shed the burden of my children's greed. I opened the journal one last time, my fingers tracing Robert's handwriting. A new page. One I hadn't noticed revealed itself. Maggie, you've won. The amulet's work is done, planted in the garden with the roses. Live. My breath caught tears stinging my eyes, but they were tears of release of mace. The amulet pulsed once, then stilled its warmth, fading to a gentle coolness, as if it had fulfilled its purpose. I walked to the garden, the roses soft in the sunlight, their petals trembling faintly. The carved stone spot in the soil was empty, its power now part of the amulet, the journal, the elixir. I knelt, digging a small hole beside the roses, and placed the amulet in the earth, covering it gently. The roses seemed to nod their petals, catching the light, and for a moment I saw Robert's shadow, faint, fleeting, his smile bright with pride. Thank you, I whispered, my voice breaking, for seeing what I couldn't, for keeping me safe. The air stirred a warm breeze, carrying the scent of roses, and I felt him. Robert, his presence a quiet embrace. The shadow vanished, but the warmth lingered, a promise that he'd always be with me in the roses, in the house, in the strength I'd found. I stood brushing the soil from my hands and felt a lightness I hadn't known in years. The betrayal, the danger, the pain, they were behind me. I was free. I returned to the house, the journal now a keepsake, not a guide. The police had called this morning, confirming that Sarah and Tom were detained, their communications, and the insurance policy under scrutiny. David had canceled his policy, his silence a confession of guilt. They'd been given their chance to prove their love, to live without my wealth. But I doubted they would. That was their burden now, not mine. I poured a glass of wine, the deep red catching the light like the roses, and sat on the porch, the garden stretching before me. I'd decided to stay in this house, not out of duty, but because it was mine, ours, Robert's, and mine. The $3.2 million trust, hidden by his foresight, was more than enough to live the life I wanted. I'd travel not to spend it as Sarah had suggested, but to see the world on my terms, perhaps a painting class in Florence, a quiet cafe in Paris, a hike through Ireland's green hills. I'd live for myself, not for the children who'd seen me as a means to an end. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and I felt a peace I hadn't known since Robert's death. The amulet was buried, its power spent, but its legacy lived in me, a woman who'd faced betrayal and emerged stronger, who'd trusted her instincts and Robert's love to guide her through the darkness. The roses stood sentinel, their petals soft and still, and I knew they'd bloom for years, a reminder of the man who'd loved me enough to protect me beyond the grave. I raised my glass, a silent toast to Robert, to myself, to the life ahead. The house creaked softly, as if in agreement, and I smiled. The storm was over. The truth was mine. And as the last light faded, I let go of the pain, the betrayal, the weight of a mother's love misused. I was Margaret Thompson, and I was free.